Hello, everyone. My name is Rachelle, and I'm the dietitian at Choices Kitsilano. I recently graduated from UBC Vancouver with a Bachelor's of Food and Nutrition and Health degree, majoring in dietetics, and I'm currently temporarily licensed with the College of Dietitians of British Columbia. At the end of June this year, I completed a 10-month presentation with Province Healthcare, where I was exposed to rehab, general medicine, gastrointestinal surgery, and diabetes. Additionally, I was fortunate to work with the Canadian Sport Institute in Victoria, BC, where I helped provide nutrition interventions, presentations, workshops, and develop recipe ideas to support Olympic athletes. My passions lie in plant-based nutrition, sport nutrition, and gut health, and I'm truly inspired by motivating others to find balance, create a deeper understanding about nutrition. And in addition to working at Choices, I'm able to extend my passion for health and fitness as a personal trainer, where I work for F45 Kids Point and a youth sports team. So for those who have attended this presentation, you are actually eligible for a nutrition buck. So a nutrition buck is $10 off a Choices coupon when you spend $50 or more, and a survey link will be sent to you at the end of the seminar. So we will collect your mailing addresses. All nutrition bucks will be sent out approximately 1 month after the event. So just visit or call your local Choices store to talk nutrition with one of our in-store nutrition consultants, or you can email nutrition@choices.com. So please enter any questions in the chat box throughout the presentation. Those will be answered in intervals during and at the very end of the presentation. And please remember, you need to sign into your YouTube account in order to make any comments or questions. So you can either quickly create one if you don't have one in order to participate in the chat box of this video. Perfect. I just have an iPad by my side here, and I am going to bring up the question so I'm able to kind of do both at the same time. Perfect. So I have that available to me now. All right, here we go. So today I'm going to be talking about fueling an active lifestyle on a plant-based diet. So the overview for today's session, I'm going to be talking about 5 main components. So background, energy, carbohydrates, protein, and nutrients. So after this session, the learning outcomes is you should be able to understand the definition of a plant-based diet. You should know what impacts energy requirements and how to ensure you remain in energy balance. Third, you should understand why carbohydrates are important and how you can consume them to optimize your performance and recovery. Fourth, you should know how to optimize your protein intake on a plant-based diet. And lastly, I'm going to go through some nutrients that are very important to consider if following a plant-based diet. All right, starting off with background. So what is a plant-based diet? So a plant-based diet is a way of eating that's centered around whole plant foods. So that could be whole grains, fruit, vegetables, legumes, nuts, seeds, and soy. So this is not the same thing as a vegan diet, as a vegan diet means absolutely no animal products. So that includes products such as clothing, shoes, and makeup. So why I don't always push for exclusively plant-based diets is because many times individuals feel too restricted. And by coining dietary terms as exclusively vegan, it's actually the top reason why many former vegetarians revert back to meat eating. So for most, putting a greater emphasis on reductions in animal consumption is more important, as it's more likely to have a greater impact on human and environmental health and animal welfare than complete omission of all animal foods. So with that being said, there are many other types of plant-based diets out there. So as you can see on the screen here, I have 6 different types. So lacto, that actually stands for dairy products. Ovo stands for eggs, pesco stands for like fish and shellfish and of the sort, and polo is poultry. So as you can see, there can be like a combination of some. So lacto ovo, that would mean no meat, fish, or poultry. However, they can eat dairy and eggs. So there's kind of a little plant-based diet for everyone out there. So if you aren't already following a plant-based diet, you may be wondering, why should you even consider adopting a plant-based diet? So in addition to any ethical and environmental concerns, there are many health benefits associated with a plant-based diet. For instance, research has shown it helps lower the risk of chronic disease. So there's less obesity, high blood pressure, hyperlipidemia, heart disease, diabetes, dementia, and many cancers, including colon and breast cancers. There's also research indicating that the consumption of plant foods can dampen the negative effects of animal products. So one study in rats found that chlorophyll, which is found in green leafy types of vegetables, has prevented tumor growth and toxic effects on cells that red meat had on colon cancer generation. So that was pretty neat. Okay, so that was kind of the whole little quick background of kind of what a plant-based diet is, the definition of a plant-based diet, and some health benefits associated with plant-based eating. So now that that's all been covered, we are going to jump into more sport nutrition related content. So starting off with energy, so energy balance. So energy balance is the balance between your energy intake and energy expenditure, which are influenced by a number of factors. So a negative energy balance is actually when your energy intake is less than your energy expenditure. And then the opposite goes for a positive energy balance. So that's when your energy intake is greater than your energy expenditure. So we want to aim for a neutral energy balance, as this helps maximize the effect of your training, promote adequate tissue repair, maintain or promote lean body mass, and meet overall nutrient needs. So it's not as simple as move more, eat less, as the body can actually evoke compensatory behavioral and metabolic changes in energy expenditure. And that's just to defend the initial body weight. So that might be kind of hard to wrap your head around. So I provided a couple examples. So the first example is if someone was eating in an extreme energy deficit, they may notice that they're moving around and or exercising less to save energy. Conversely, sizable changes in energy expenditure may evoke changes in energy intake. So an example of that is if someone starts to begin to weightlift or do lots of cardio frequently, they may notice a rise in their hunger levels and therefore a drive to eat more food. Okay, so with that being said, there are multiple different factors that go into energy output and total energy expenditure. So if you see on the screen lots of words that do not make sense to you and they seem quite complicated, I am here to break them down for you. So the very first one, resting metabolic rate. So that is actually the amount of energy you expend if you were to lay down and do nothing. So it's the energy required so that your basic bodily functions can run smoothly. So this is impacted by body size, lean body mass, and things like gender. Second is thermic effect of food, also TEF, if you want to make it a little bit shorter. So that's the amount of energy you need to properly digest and absorb your food. So things that can impact this is the meal size. So if eating something small versus eating a large, big meal. Things like macronutrient composition of a meal. So if you have a meal higher in protein, take tofu, for example, it may take more energy to digest something that was exclusively simple carbohydrates. So a bowl of puff rice. So that protein meal is going to take a lot more effort to digest than that puff rice. Third is physical activity expenditure. Now, this one is something that a lot of people are quite familiar with. So this can vary with intensity, the duration, and the frequency of your exercise. So obviously, the more intensity, the longer you do it, and the more frequent you do it, the more energy you're going to be expending there. Next is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is also shortened as NEAT. Now, this one is basically just your activities of daily living. So think about fidgeting or maybe cleaning your kitchen or going for a walk with your dog. Any sort of thing that you just have to do in your day basis is that NEAT. Even things like posture, maybe I should be sitting up a little bit taller while I do this presentation. That also contributes to NEAT. And lastly is energy efficiency. So energy efficiency is how your body responds to a calorie restriction or a caloric surplus. So back to that energy balance is your body's goal is to maintain that nice balance where it has enough energy to do necessary energy requiring tasks it needs to do. So it reacts to changes in energy balance by slowing things down when you don't consume enough energy, or on the flip side, it can actually speed up your metabolism when you consume more energy than you normally do. So a good example of this that I like to think of is, have you ever felt overly warm when you've eaten too much? Like maybe you got to strip off a little bit of your jacket, you're just feeling a little bit too hot. Or the opposite, have you ever gone prolonged periods of underfueling and maybe felt cold 24/7? So these are kind of examples of energy efficiency and how your body likes to try to maintain that energy balance there. So next, energy input. So this is the opposite side of the equation. So there are multiple factors that can contribute to energy input, things like peer pressure, food availability and eating frequency, things like serving sizes, energy density, the macronutrient composition and fiber content. With that one, again, if you have more protein and more fiber, you might not eat as much because you feel a little bit more satiated. Things like food preferences, if you are a very picky eater, it might be hard to get enough energy in. Things like hunger and satiety, emotions, coping, coming around your period, maybe you're pulling out that tub of ice cream, you're just trying to cope with the pain. Yeah, so those are all factors that may influence your energy intake. So energy input, it can be quite difficult to measure as people tend to over or underreport intake. So honestly, both sides of the equation, there's so many different factors. So it's kind of hard to, I don't know, track them all sometimes. That's why it's really nice to have a dietitian's help with that. And that brings me to this slide. So as a dietitian, we use specific equations, such as the one you see on the screen, to calculate your individual energy needs based off of your goals. However, I will not be going into this too far in depth during this presentation, but if you do want to learn more about this information, you can reach out to me via email. I'll provide that to you at the very end of the presentation, of course, or you can reach out to another dietitian. All right, going into low energy availability. I'm very curious if anyone's ever heard of this term before. If you haven't, listen up. First, I'll be going to dive into what it is. So what is low energy availability? Also, we can shorten that to just LEA. So it is when the amount of food you eat does not meet your energy requirements needed for your daily activity, things like exercise and other body systems such as digestion, making hormones, and your immune function. So incidences of LEA actually may be higher in those that are plant-based due to their lower caloric density of plant foods. And that's why I'm here today, to educate you all on how we can prevent this on a plant-based diet. So why do we want to prevent this? There are actually lots of different implications associated with being in low energy availability. So disruptions typically occur when energy availability is less than 30 calories per kilogram of lean body mass. That was just me spitting numbers at you. I'm going to give you a quick example. So for instance, if you had a 70 kilogram or a 154 pound athlete, their 20% body fat, that means that their cost of low energy availability is 1,690 calories a day. So roughly 1,700 calories. So the implications associated with being in low energy availability may be loss or failure to gain muscle and bone mass, increased risk of injury, compromised immune function, illness and fatigue. It can also cause lower concentrations of male and female hormones, so things like testosterone and estrogen. So an example of this is menstrual cycle dysfunction in female athletes, or perhaps decreased libido. And lastly, it can also cause impaired performance, adaptation, and prolonged recovery process. So definitely things we want to avoid. Moving into the next bit here. So how to prevent it. We want to aim to be in that neutral energy balance. So when our energy intake matches our energy output, and we want that to optimally perform and maintain good health. So we're able to maximize the effect of our training, promote adequate tissue repair, maintain or promote lean body mass, and meet our overall nutrient needs. So I know that not everyone wants to calculate how much they're eating and how much energy they're expending in a day. So how do we know that we're eating enough without having to write things down and track it all in our minds? I want you guys to tell me first. So before I kind of break down what I like to check in on, if you guys have any comments that you'd like to leave in the comments section here, I would love to hear from you. So how do you personally know you haven't eaten enough? Think about like physical signs, maybe anything along that line, like your focus, your concentration. Is there anything that really sticks to you when you are getting kind of hangry? I'll give you about 30 seconds to write in some submissions. Okay, I don't know if I can't see the comment section or if no one put in any comments, but that is totally fine. I will share some of my personal signs and signals. So how do I know that I'm eating enough? So there are other ways you may know by not that you aren't eating enough, which don't require calculations. And I kind of put it into three different things. So the first one is your energy levels. So are you feeling any sort of fatigue during the day? Do you find yourself not moving as much to do tasks? Maybe you have to clean your room, but you've really been putting it off. Or your dog is really getting mad at you because you won't take it on a walk anymore. How is your performance doing? Maybe you play soccer and your games are starting to kind of get worse and worse with time. Are you relying on caffeine for energy? Are you really thinking that you kind of need that midday coffee, that morning coffee, that maybe even a coffee at 5 p.m.? Maybe you just aren't eating enough. The second thing is meal frequency. So how long are you going without food? So with this one, I like to have a general guideline of eating about every 2 to 3 hours. So no more than 4 hours between meals and snacks. That can just ensure that we're constantly getting that nice fuel throughout the day. And lastly, mood. So I'm sure you've all heard of the term hangry. I even dropped it a little bit earlier. So if you're finding yourself a little bit more irritable, maybe you have low patience or you're having trouble concentrating on any schoolwork or tasks, that also may be a sign that you're not fueling enough. So I encourage you all to kind of check in on these three things in yourself and then work on some interventions with that. So I will give you some of those. So first, I'd like to talk about energy density on a plant-based diet. So with energy needs in mind, especially as an athlete, we need to consider the energy density of plant-based diets. So I've met so many people, including myself, attempting at a plant-based diet in my past and not doing well because I didn't properly understand the energy density. So if you find yourself eating mostly that lower category of the fruits and the vegetables and maybe the whole grains, but you aren't reaching up and incorporating some of those top foods, you may just be under fueling, therefore not thriving. So a whole foods plant-based diet allows us to eat a higher volume of food for a low amount of calories while still feeling satiated. So the thing is, you could be eating like 5 meals a day, maybe like 3 meals, 2 snacks, feeling nice and full. That's just because it's naturally lower in fat and high in fiber. So because of that, you may be underfueling without actually truly knowing you are, especially if you're eating lots of raw vegetables. They make you feel really full quite fast. So again, it's really important to consume adequate calories on a plant-based diet, especially if you're aiming to fuel your performance and support your recovery. That's why I kind of teach you how to bring this all together. So moving into the next slide, I'm going to be talking about how to increase your calories. So I kind of listed a couple of different tips that I'll walk you through. So the first one is incorporating more calorically dense foods such as nuts, seeds, avocado, hummus, and olive oil. So a good example of this is, say you build a nice vegetable-centered salad and you want to increase the calories, but you're kind of not sure how. The first thing you can do is add a fat-based dressing, okay? Or you can sprinkle on some nuts and seeds, maybe add in a serving of proteins, so put some tofu in there and mix in a starchy carbohydrate. So a starchy carbohydrate could be quinoa or rice or anything of the sort, okay? Next tip is to go off that last example, you can increase the serving sizes of your grains and proteins, such as legumes, lentils, and soy products. Now, proteins are very important, and I will be going into them a little bit later on in this session. So it's important to try to aim to have a quarter of your plate coming from protein, or you can also think of your hand, the size of your palm and the thickness of your palm. That's about how much protein you should be having per meal. In terms of starch and carbohydrate, again, claiming that quarter plate or up to a third of being starchy carbohydrates. Thinking back to the hand model, you can also think about a fist worth of carbs. So if you're kind of having a nice training day, you're highly active, I would aim more towards that third of your plate, or maybe even 2 handfuls of carbohydrates there, really making sure that we stay in tune with our bodies and we aren't just following the balanced plate model, but we're also checking in with ourselves and making sure we're fueling enough there. The third tip here is always have food on hand. So things like dried fruit, nuts, crackers, granola bars, anything that's really easy to throw into your bag or into your pocket. Those things are all great examples of on-the-go snacks. Fourth is make room for snacks in between meals. So try to aim to have 2 to 3 snacks a day that are around 250 to even 500 calories. That's on top of our 3 meals a day. That will help reduce the stomach discomfort by having more small, energy dense meals. If you're someone that tends to feel really full really fast and you can't stomach the fact of having a big plate of food in front of you, this is going to be a really great strategy to try to increase your calories. So again, energy dense foods, spread them out evenly throughout the day with that 3 meals and 2 to 3 snacks. Next tip is opt for lower fiber foods. So again, like I kind of spoke to earlier, fiber, it really makes us feel full. So if you're finding that you're feeling overly full at your meals, maybe instead of centering your whole meal around raw vegetables, let's go a little bit lower fiber. You can even swap out that whole grain brown rice for maybe a jasmine rice that contains less fiber so you don't feel as full afterward. And lastly, consuming liquid calories, either from juices, smoothies, or plant milks. The really nice thing about smoothies is you can just throw whatever in there and it's a lot easier to get down. You can throw in energy dense things like dates, maybe even some maple syrup, things that won't add any extra fiber and make you feel even more full. I remember making calorically dense smoothies for my brothers at home when I still live with them, and this was a really great strategy. All right, now that we talked about energy, we're going to go right into carbohydrates. So before I dive into carbohydrates, I want to know, why do we need carbohydrates from all of you? If you guys want to add in any comments, I would love to hear why you think carbohydrates are important. I'll give you again about 30 seconds to do so. Okay, again, I'm not too sure if I can't see the comments or if people are just not commenting, which is totally fair. This is a lot of information too. So also, no question or comment is a stupid comment. This is a place for learning. So I really encourage you guys to just ask as many questions throughout and throw out your suggestions whenever you have them. Okay. So I'm going to move into my slides. So the very first thing that I think about is carbohydrates are our body's main source of energy. So we need them for our muscle, we need them for our brain and central nervous system. We store carbohydrates in the form of glycogen for later use. So glycogen, what is it? It is a chain of carbohydrates that's broken down into single sugar units that we use as energy. So think about my fist being one sugar unit. It's boom, 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 just like a huge chain of carbohydrates that's stored in our muscle, it's stored in our liver, it's also floating around in our blood. Okay, so you may have heard of the term water weight. So this is referring to our glycogen stores. So 1 gram of carbohydrates actually holds 3 grams of water. So if you've ever eaten a lot of carbohydrates one day, obviously staying hydrated as well, you may notice that your weight might go up. And that is because the carbohydrates stored in your muscle, it's holding on to that extra water, therefore increasing your weight. So really cool. I'm not too sure if many of you know this, but our muscle glycogen, it actually holds up to 300 to 400 grams, or equivalent to 1,200 to 1,600 calories. Our liver glycogen, it holds less at 75 to 100 grams, or 300 to 400 calories. And our blood glucose is around 25 grams or 100 calories. All right, second, so carbohydrates are important for performance. So you need to properly fuel your muscles and brain to optimize your training, performance, and health. So they are our main source of energy during prolonged moderate endurance training and intermittent high intensity exercise. So are those forms of exercise? Examples of moderate endurance training are things like swimming, running, jogging, dancing, biking, doing the stairs, doing a stair climber, anything of the sort. Examples of intermittent high intensity exercise are things like HIIT training. So things like F45 or Tabata, or if you want to hop on the treadmill and do some walking, some jogging, some sprinting, and changing up your intervals, that also counts, as well as sports. So things like basketball and soccer. A lot of those athletes, they tend to jog here and sprint and stop and stand and watch. So because they're changing their intensities, that also is intermittent high intensity exercise, especially because when they do go hard, they go really hard. And then carbohydrates also increase your capacity to exercise longer before exhaustion. So can you think of a time where you've exercised without eating, specifically like a carbohydrate containing meal beforehand? Now think about that time. And now I want you to compare it, or if you haven't done this, try to think about comparing it to training as hard as you'd like if you had eaten a carbohydrate rich meal. So kind of like when you used to play sports, or if you still play sports and someone tells you to have a nice big bowl of pasta the night before, that's because we have those carbohydrates stored in our muscles and we're going to use energy the next day, making us able to go harder for longer. And third, carbohydrates for recovery. So it does this by triggering the response of insulin. So insulin is a hormone, and I'm going to break it down to you in this way. So I want you to think of our body's cells as a lock and insulin as a key. Okay, so insulin opens our muscle cells and allows carbohydrates and protein to restore our muscle glycogen stores that were depleted during exercise to promote that muscle building. So again, by eating carbohydrates, insulin comes along, opens up our muscle cells, and it allows the carbohydrates and the protein to shuttle right into the muscle cells to help promote recovery, which is pretty cool. All right, another question. So I'm going to leave again 30 seconds around there to see any comments about how many carbohydrates do we really need. So you could either throw out random numbers, you can give specifics about how many meals, anything of the sort. I'll give you a little bit of extra time, see if anyone has anything to say. Okay, so there is nothing, but that is all right. Okay, so in the table on the screen, I included a guideline for an average individual who is performing light to moderate exercise. Again, like energy needs, there are guidelines dietitians use to determine each individual's carbohydrate requirements. So remember, your needs are highly individual, and if you're curious about how to calculate your own carbohydrate needs, you can reach out to a dietitian. But again, if you'd like, you can even screenshot this and kind of see. So total percentage of calories for a normal person, we typically like to recommend that 45 to 60%. And I will kind of jump into a little example on the next slide there. So if someone's eating a 2,000 calorie diet and we are giving them that guideline of 15 to 20 servings, so about 225 to 300 grams of carbohydrates, it may look like the following. So the reason I wanted to show you this example is because unlike a conventional diet that includes animal protein, plant-based diets are typically higher in carbohydrate. So that's something we need to consider. So for instance, in addition to protein, legumes are also a source of carbohydrate. So if you look at the example here, for breakfast, we have oats and maple syrup. That's a nice combination of complex carbohydrates, that slow burning energy, and that fast carbohydrate for more fast absorbing energy there. Then we have hummus. So again, contains chickpeas and tahini. So a nice form of protein in addition to carbohydrates there. And we have rice, green beans. Note, yes, vegetables do count as a carbohydrate as well. We have toast and a banana, pasta, legumes. Again, legumes double the protein and carbohydrate there, and finish off with some popcorn. So this is just a very basic example. All right, so going into pre-workout nutrition. So the aim of pre-workout nutrition is to provide the right amount of carbohydrate, fluid, and protein to prevent hunger and low blood sugar and potentially optimize training and performance. So I'm going to briefly explain something called the 3-2-1 rule. So this is a very rough guideline that you can try to keep in mind when you're thinking about pre-workout nutrition. So starting off with the 3, so that's 3 hours before you're about to go train. So with this one, you want to have a full meal or a nice large snack that contains protein, fat, and carbohydrates. 3 hours, 3 components. Try to think of it that way. Next is 2 hours. So with this one, you want to have, again, 2 components, and that being carbohydrates and protein. And then 1 hour before training, you want to even reduce it to just the carbohydrates. So a small snack containing simple carbohydrates that could be coming from crackers like I have on the screen there, or you could have some dried fruit or more like processed maybe grains that are a bit lower in fiber, or fruits, anything along that sort. In addition to this 3-2-1 rule, there's some additional guidelines that I'd like to share with you all. So first, dietitians typically use the guideline of 1 to 4 grams per kilogram of carbohydrate pre-workout. Again, this is highly variable between individuals, and it depends on the type of exercise that they're going to be doing. So an example of using that guideline, a 70 kilogram athlete, that could look something like having 2 slices of toast with 2 tablespoons of jam and half a banana. All right, another guideline for pre-workout nutrition is that it contains fluid, which contributes to hydration. So that may be coming from fruit, a smoothie, or having some fluid on the side. Third is familiar foods. So I like people to stick to familiar foods just to prevent any unexpected stomach upset, especially if you are going into a competition or a really important sports game where you need to be on game. Just making sure that we're not eating anything that we know will hurt our stomachs. And lastly, the composition does depend on the timing. So with that being said, composition, think about kind of fat and fiber. It goes along with that 3-2-1 rule, but as we get closer to training, we try to have things lower in fat and lower in fiber. That reasoning is because fat and fiber, both together and independently, they slow down our digestion. So if we have a higher fat meal or a higher fiber meal, that food actually might just be sitting in our stomach a lot longer than we want it to be, again, therefore causing some stomach discomfort. All right, and so that is the topic of carbohydrates. We're now going to move on to protein. So again, I'm hitting you with another question. If no one has any comments in 30 seconds, that's totally fair. We will move on to mine. But I'm really curious, why do you think protein is important for an active individual? Now, this is funny because we're talking about plant-based nutrition. And I think with plant-based nutrition, this typically tends to be the biggest question people have for plant-based eaters is, where do you get your protein? So why is it so important? I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts. Okay, no comments. That is totally fine. Moving on to the next slide, which is protein requirements. So again, we're going to touch on why protein is important in the future, but starting with, or in the future, yes, but starting with protein requirements. So if a plant-based consumer is eating enough calories to meet their needs, it is rare that they'll be deficient in protein. However, if they are eating inadequate amounts, they still may exhibit symptoms such as low energy, loss of muscle mass, or maybe not feeling satisfied by their meals. So when it comes to protein, recommendations are highly individualized. So as you can see on the screen, for an average human, the recommended daily allowance, which is abbreviated to RDA, is 0.8 grams per kilogram per day. So that is the average guideline for an average person. However, for an athlete, they're going to need substantially more protein at 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram per day. And that higher end is for those looking to prioritize muscle building and strength. And perhaps that lower end is for athletes where muscle strength and building may not be their main priority. So maybe something like an endurance runner. But again, protein is very individualized. And that is why you should also reach out to a dietitian to try to figure this out for yourself. So I have an average human athlete, and you're probably thinking, where do I lie here? So who is an athlete? This is one that participates in exercise that is planned, it's structured, and it has like a repetitive movement that has the objective in improving physical fitness. So they either like take a sport seriously, they have a fitness goal, or they perform systematic training. And then at the very bottom here, you can see that I broke down those recommendations into per meal and per snack. So that's 0.3 to 0.55 grams per kilogram of protein per meal or snack across a minimum of 4 meals per day. So with that, I'm kind of alluding to another thing that I'm going to be touching on. So I will get into that slide, which is timing. So on a plant-based diet, it's common for people to consume lower protein meals earlier in the day. Okay, think about plant-based meals at breakfast. They're especially lower in protein when you think about like toast and peanut butter with banana, or maybe some oatmeal with banana and berries and chocolate chips. Those aren't great examples of high protein meals. So I laid out an example of what maybe a typical plant-based diet may look like for some. So at breakfast, we have a whopping 10 grams of protein, that banana oatmeal with almond butter. So yeah, only 10 grams of protein there. Then a snack is 0 grams of protein. You're just having an apple. Lunch, burrito bowl with some black beans and rice. Okay, we're hitting that 15 grams. Still not probably meeting that guideline that I had mentioned previously. And then a snack is vegetables and hummus at that 5 grams. And then lastly, dinner, boom, we got 45 grams of protein, edamame pasta with tofu. So as you can see in this example, we have low protein up until dinner, then we go boom, lots of protein. So the reason why I don't typically like to recommend this is because protein spacing is very important. We can only absorb a certain amount of protein in one sitting, and that's kind of why I gave that recommendation before. So that 0.3 to 0.55 per meal, grams per kilogram per meal, that is what we want to aim for throughout the day, because any excess protein, say at that 45 grams at dinner, you may only be able to absorb like 2/3 of it or however much. So I'd like to recommend higher protein meals, also focusing throughout the day, not just dinner. So with that being said, I provided a nice example of this. So this is an example of the same diet. However, I boosted the protein content so it better fits that guideline that I had mentioned before. So walking through these examples, for breakfast, we had that oatmeal, right? To boost up protein, we cooked that oatmeal in soy milk instead of water, and we added some hemp hearts. That boosted it up to around 30 grams of protein. For that snack with that apple, I just added a protein smoothie with 1 scoop of plant-based protein. That's around 21, maybe 30 grams of protein, depending on the type of protein powder you are using. And then lunch, all we had to do is add 1 serving of tempeh to boost us up to 30 grams of protein. Then a snack, this is actually one of my favorite protein boosters, is dry roasted edamame. So that's a really high protein snack. Again, just add a 1/3 cup into that snack, and now we hit that 21 grams of protein. And then for dinner, I did actually decrease the protein content. For this example, this person couldn't absorb it. So I thought it was unnecessary. We took out that bean pasta. We threw in just some whole grain pasta and topped it with some nutritional yeast. And that way, the nutritional yeast Also adds a nice cheesy flavor too. One thing you could do instead, because the first one, it had tofu in it as well, you could just keep that edamame pasta or that legume pasta, and that would be sufficient protein. All right, that brings me to protein quality. So with protein quality, this is more important with plant-based nutrition because you find more incomplete proteins. So there are two types of proteins, complete, and like I just mentioned, incomplete proteins, which can both be found in a plant-based diet. So a complete protein contains all of the 9 essential amino acids. So an essential amino acid is we can't actually make it ourselves. Therefore, we need to actually obtain it through our diet. So examples of complete plant proteins include soy products, so things like tofu, tempeh, edamame, some whole grains, so quinoa, buckwheat, amaranth, and nutritional yeast. So like on that pasta, we're getting a complete protein there. And then an incomplete protein is the opposite of that. So it doesn't contain all of the 9 essential amino acids, making them lower quality proteins when it stands by itself. So incomplete proteins are found mostly in grains, legumes, and nuts and seeds. However, we can compensate for these limiting amino acids through a thing called mutual supplementation, which I will be diving into next. Okay, so mutual supplementation. It's all about incomplete proteins. So you got your grains, you got your legumes, and your nuts and seeds, except for the previously mentioned complete proteins. So mutual supplementation is when you combine those incomplete proteins together to make sure that we have a complete amino acid profile. So it doesn't have to be done at each meal as long as you get a wide variety of amino acids throughout your day. However, for instance, you can combine grains with legumes, such as rice and beans, and that would be a complete protein. Or you can combine grains and nuts and seeds, and that is toast with nut butter, complete protein. And then lastly, you can combine legumes with nuts and seeds, which is kind of like hummus. That's a great example of it, actually, is because you have the chickpeas and tahini. So those are all examples of making those incomplete proteins a complete protein. But again, if you just wanted to have your toast without the nut butter, you're crazy. But anyways, you don't have to have it together. So as long as you have them all throughout your day, you're going to be fine. So for instance, if you wanted avocado toast as a snack, again, that's just that whole grain bread and there's no nuts and seeds or legumes added there. But you have a handful of nuts, like maybe a couple hours later, you're still technically doing that mutual supplementation by the end of the day. So you're A-okay. All right, and that is on proteins. So the summary of that one was make sure we get the complete proteins, so we bring those incomplete proteins together. We make sure we eat sufficient protein, so making sure that we space them out nice and evenly. And lastly, protein recommendations are highly individualized. So again, speak to a dietitian or your healthcare professional to figure out your protein needs. Last is the nutrients. So we're going to be talking about vitamin B12, omega-3s, vitamin D, iron, calcium, all nutrients that are of concern on a plant-based diet. So in this presentation, I will be talking about their function, different sources on a plant-based diet. However, if you have any specific questions about your own individual intake or levels, you should talk to your healthcare provider as they can help you attain your lab values. And then from there, you may be advised by your doctor to take supplements. So your supplement guidelines will be individualized for your specific needs. Starting off with vitamin B12. So the function of vitamin B12 is it helps with anemia prevention. It supports bone health, it improves mental well-being, enhances cognitive health, and helps with increased energy. So B12 is a nutrient that's commonly found in animal-based foods. However, B12 deficiency is quite common amongst all individuals, whether they follow a plant-based diet or not. So one common symptom of deficiency is weakness, tiredness, or lightheadedness. And to optimize your B12 intake on a plant-based diet, just increase your intake of vitamin B12 rich foods. And my favorite is nutritional yeast. You could also have fortified foods, things like soy milk or orange juice, that's for B12. And another great source is meat analogs. So I just put a picture of Ives hot dog there, but any type of meat analog tends to be fortified with B12 as well. And again, get your lab values checked, see if you are actually deficient in it, because you may be getting a wide variety and you might be okay on this one. All right, next is vitamin D. So the function of vitamin D is that it supports bone health, supports your immune system, and again, improves your mental well-being. So vitamin D is actually one of the most common nutrient deficiencies across individuals. So vitamin D deficiency symptoms are usually subtle and they actually may take years or decades to surface. So preventing deficiency can result in health benefits such as reduced risk of osteoporosis and increased physical strength. It may ease the symptoms in people with clinical depression as well. So you can get vitamin D 3 different ways. So the first is your diet. This one is actually kind of difficult more on a plant-based diet, I would say, as vitamin D is found in a limited number of foods, most of them being animal products. So things like egg yolks and fish, such as salmon and tuna. So if you're following a plant-based diet, you can optimize your vitamin D intake by increasing your intake of vitamin-rich foods, such as fortified foods and mushrooms. As well as vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, meaning that in order to efficiently absorb it, you need to consume vitamin D with fat. So if you're taking a supplement or drinking a cup of orange juice that has vitamin D in it, try to have some source of fat with that so you're able to fully absorb the vitamin D. The second way you can get vitamin D is actually through the sun. So our bodies can synthesize vitamin D mostly through the months of May to September. If you lay in the sun, exposing your legs, arms, face, and hands for about 3 to 8 minutes, you can produce around 1,000 IUs of vitamin D. However, in the late fall and winter in Canada, especially Vancouver, where I am, we can't make enough vitamin D in the sun, and therefore you actually may be more at risk of low vitamin D during those months. And third, supplements. So it is typically recommended for athletes to supplement with 2,000 IUs of vitamin D per day. However, again, I do recommend that you reach out to your healthcare professional to get your lab values checked, just so you have proper supplementation recommendations for your individual needs. Next is calcium. So to optimize your calcium intake on a plant-based diet, just increase your intake of calcium-rich foods that can help with bone formation, muscle contraction, and releasing hormones. So some really good sources are dark leafy greens such as broccoli, collards, kale, bok choy, things like legumes, so lentils, chickpeas, black beans, and kidney beans, nuts and seeds like tahini, almonds, cashews, pumpkin seeds, and walnuts. One thing with this one that is unique to a plant-based diet is some foods are actually poorly absorbed because they are high in something called oxalates or phytates. So oxalates and phytates are naturally occurring compounds found in plant foods that bind to calcium to decrease their absorption. So foods that are high in oxalates include rhubarb, spinach, Swiss chard, and beet greens. And foods that are high in phytates include beans, nuts and seeds, and whole grains. However, note these foods are still healthy, and I've talked about their benefits in previous slides. So you shouldn't try to avoid these foods unless others specified by your healthcare professional. So one really fun plant-based recipe that I love to make that was taught to me by a dietitian that was my teacher for a cooking class in school is a kale like stir fry kind of salad. So take a pan, throw in some kale, drizzle on some tahini with some soy sauce, maybe a dash of maple syrup and sriracha. And it is just a calcium powerhouse because you got that kale and tahini in there and it's delicious. Right, moving on to the fourth nutrient we'll talk about is omega-3s. So omega-3s have so many different functions. It supports brain health, nerve health, eye development, reduced risk of heart disease. It improves your immune system, cancer protection, cognitive health, arthritis prevention. Like, there is countless benefits of omega-3s. In a healthy, balanced diet, it's important to include a wide variety of all three types of omega-3s. So those three types are a thing called EPA, DHA, and ALA. So the majority of plant-based foods high in omega-3s, such as chia, hemp, ground flax seeds, they contain only one of these three, and that is ALA. So ALA can be converted to EPA or DHA. However, this is an inefficient process as only a small percentage is converted. So there's only one plant-based source that contains EPA and DHA, and that's algae. So depending on your intake of plant-based foods high in ALA, and if you're producing enough DHA and EPA, you may or may not be advised to take a supplement containing EPA and DHA. So you can just talk to your healthcare provider for your specific needs on this one. And lastly is iron. So, like you may or may not know, plant-based foods contain something called non-heme iron. So in contrast, animal products such as meat contain something called heme iron, which is a lot more absorbable than non-heme iron. As a result, iron deficiency is more likely seen in those consuming a plant-based diet. So different symptoms that occur with anemia or iron deficiency are things like extreme fatigue, weakness, pale skin, brittle nails, cold hands and feet. Those are all common signs and symptoms. And to combat this, as a plant-based consumer, it's important to keep the following in mind. So first, because plant-based foods are non-heme iron, iron recommendations are 80% higher on a plant-based diet than one that includes animal products. The second tip is that we want to try to enhance absorption as much as we possibly can. So consuming iron-rich foods with vitamin C will really help enhance the absorption. And second, you can actually even cook in cast iron pots and pans, or there's a product called Lucky Iron Fish that can help boost the iron content of your foods there. Next is we want to prevent doing things that would decrease the absorption of our iron. So avoiding consumption of beverages such as coffee and tea around meals, as this decreases the absorption of iron. And then the second one that's actually specific to sport is we produce a hormone called hepcidin after we exercise that decreases the absorption of our iron. So this is almost why like iron deficiency can be so tricky and so prevalent in athletes, is because we're constantly working out, we're constantly pumping out hepcidin. So because of this, it is advised to take iron supplements either in the morning, like away from your training. And a previous recommendation was that you should try to refrain from taking your supplements till about 4 to 6 hours after training. However, based off of current research, it was found that you can take iron supplements within 30 minutes after exercise without seeing any negative effects of hepcidin there. So to increase our iron foods, we want to focus on protein-rich plant foods such as tofu, tempeh, and seitan. Things like vegetables like spinach, peas, collards, broccolis, nuts, things like almonds, walnuts, pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, hemp seeds, ground flax seeds, and whole grains. So quinoa, enriched and fortified pastas and cereals and rice. So that is all for iron. And that comes to the very end of this presentation. I know there was a lot in there. So if you have any questions, I will leave some time to answer them. I also have my email and my website and my Instagram all up on the screen there. So if no questions are coming to you right now, you can also just think about them, and then you can shoot me an email or a DM on Instagram, anything that's easiest for you. I would love to help you guys out. And again, if you are in the Vancouver area, I am at Choices Kitsilano. So if you want to pop by here and have any questions answered, I would love to help you out. And again, if you're at different locations around BC, there are many great, lovely nutrition consultants that can help you out with any kinds of questions with diet and nutrition. Okay, I'm just going to double check here. It turns out I was getting questions, everyone, and I couldn't see it on my iPad. So I see lots of questions here. Oh, I'm so sorry I missed out on them. So I see you feeling overly tired and super hungry when you didn't eat enough, tummy hurts, feeling cold, dizzy, shaking hands, irritable. Yes, those are all great signs and things with not eating enough food. Oh, I'm so sad I missed all of these. And then carbohydrates for energy. I see for energy, for energy, for energy. Yes, that's great. Then I see, yeah, protein, maintain and build muscle, body repair, muscle growth, energy, brain power. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed the presentation. And then I see one question here. I'm just going to open this up a little bit. Do herbal teas also block iron absorption? Yeah, that's a great question. So herbal teas, some of them actually do impact iron absorption. I can't think of the specific ones on the top of my head, but if you want to shoot me an email regarding this or look this up, I would definitely look into some herbal teas because unfortunately, they do have impacts on iron absorption as well. Next question here is, what programs do you recommend to keep organized when planning meals and prepping to buy groceries? That's a good question. Different programs I recommend to keep organized. I wish I could give a program because that would be very helpful. I don't use any sort of programs. One thing that I actually find very helpful is just getting a nice journal and writing things out, finding all of your different recipes, kind of creating your own grocery list based off of the recipes that you want to meal prep. I think that would be a best approach if you are kind of more of a learner where you need to write things down. Good programs to see nutrient profile, however, that I do like is Chronometer. That one is free, I believe, for a general subscription. And with that one, you're actually able to see when you plug in specific nutrients or different foods, you see all of the different vitamins, minerals, protein, carbohydrates, everything that you can get. So if you are shifting from like a diet containing more animal-based products and you want to shift to become more plant-based, that would be a great tool to kind of make sure that you're hitting a lot of those requirements. Or you can reach out to a dietitian as well, and they can help you along the way. I see a question about soy being bad for hormones or can cause cancer. Yes, actually, that is something that I had made a Instagram post about not too long ago, is myth busting soy. So I know soy has gotten a lot of bad news in the media about cancer and all of that sort of stuff. I can say with confidence that soy actually is associated with decreased risk of cancer and many different types of cancers, as well as hormones. With the hormone topic in soy, it's very interesting because plant-based foods such as soy, so tofu, tempeh, they contain phytoestrogens. So the estrogens found in soy products, they are not the same type of estrogens found in humans or animals or any of the thing. So you can kind of think of it as our body's cells and estrogen. We have a key here. Our human estrogen is able to plug in nicely into our cells. But if we have a plant estrogen, think of it as like a completely different key. And when it's coming to those cells, it's unable to fit in. So it doesn't work the same in our bodies as a normal estrogen from an animal or a human may work. So that is also a myth. Yeah, and if you go to my Instagram here, Plant Driven Sports, you'll also be able to find my whole post about soy there. And oh, thank you so much. It was a very interesting presentation. I'm glad. Yeah, I had a lot of fun doing it. It was my first time, so it was really great. And thank you so much for participating in the comments. I'm really sad I didn't get to see them throughout the presentation. But again, if I do this another time, I will know in the future. So thank you so much, everyone. I'll give about 30 more seconds in case anyone has any questions. But yeah, thank you so much for asking questions throughout. I had a lot of fun. And I will actually be in a not nutrition seminar, but a seminar next week. If you guys are into working out, I will be helping out with the F45 seminar next week. So I will see you all then. And thank you again so much for watching this presentation, and please reach out to me if you have any questions, and definitely come visit me at Choices in Kitsilano or visit our nutrition consultants at the other locations. And thank you so much, everyone. That is the end.